This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. This episode is sponsored by C-School, the online school for creativity training. If you'd like to unleash your creative potential and access a free Creativity Blueprint training series, then just head over to c.school. That's www.c.school for your free training series. In today's episode, I speak with author Susan Peppercorn, and we talk about getting to know your inner critic, negative self-talk, and setting goals. Enjoy this episode. Hey, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to have Susan Peppercorn on the show. Are you trying to figure out what's next in your career? Are you trying to find greater satisfaction in your work without sacrificing your personal life? If so, Susan Peppercorn can help. Susan is a career coach who enables professionals to find their next best career step. The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, and Harvard Business Review are just some of the publications that have tapped her for career advice. She is also the author of the new book, Ditch Your Inner Critic at Work, and it's my great pleasure to have Susan on the show today. So welcome, Susan.
Thank you, James. It's a great pleasure to be here.
So share with everyone what's going on in your world just now.
Well, what's going on in my world at the moment is a gigantic snowstorm with about 1.5 feet of snow on the ground and a lot of wind, and I can't see out my windows.
Wow.
So it's the third major storm that we've had in 10 days, and I'm just hoping that my power stays on. But beyond that, I'm coaching clients actually who are looking at making career transitions. That's what I love to do. That is my constant work. And I also blog regularly on the topic. So those are some of the things that keep me busy until spring comes and I can get out riding my bicycle.
So I'm wondering, at this time of year, we're speaking, at the very start of the year, pretty much the start of the year, do you see an uptick in clients coming to you because they've maybe made their New Year's resolutions? They've said, I'm going to make a change this year in my life and my career and in what I'm doing with the work. Do you start to get more inquiries coming in at this time of year?
I do. I tend to get them right at the beginning of the year, just for the reason that you mentioned. That, especially when people take some time off around the holidays and they have a little more time to reflect, they start to think about, am I in the right place? Is this what I want to be doing? And, so it happens all year round, but the beginning of the year in particular.
So you've obviously got this new book that's just come out, Ditch Your Inner Critic at Work.
Yes.
How did you learn your craft as a writer? Where did this begin for you? Where did you kind of first get interested in writing and thinking, actually, this is something I want to be able to do?
So I'll start back before I wrote the book. I had been in a program where I got a certification in positive psychology. And actually, my book is research-based, and that is for a specific purpose, which I'll explain later on. But one of the things that I learned in this program is that people who set challenging goals for themselves, not rather than, easily attainable goals, are happier because when they see themselves progressing toward meeting that goal and reaching that goal, they really feel a sense of pride. And I had been pretty conservative in my own career decisions. And I said, okay, I'm going to set a audacious goal, and that goal is to write a book. And so that was really the start of it. So
I know a lot of people, they will have on their goals, maybe their bucket list or their long list of goals, or maybe at the start of the year they set that goal. This is finally the year that I'm going to write that book. But as we know, most people proceed to do nothing about it, or it doesn't really transpire. So what did you do? What did you kind of maybe put in place in order to start moving you towards the success of that and the completion of that goal?
So it's a really good question, and I will also share with your listeners that was an issue for me as well. So I just didn't decide one day I'm going to write a book and sat down to write it. What I needed and what most people need when they have a challenging goal that they're trying to accomplish is an accountability partner. Someone who is going to hold you. Someone who is going to hold you to the progress that that you state you're going to make. So in my case, I hired an editor and we came up with an outline. We jointly decided on what that outline was going to look like, and then we edited chapter by chapter. So what happened is she was very quick. Her turnaround was much faster than she said it was going to be. So that really acted as a motivator for me, because if I finished a chapter and she turned it around within, 2 weeks, I was on to the next chapter because I felt that I couldn't disappoint myself or disappoint her. So that was a great help to me. And I'm not sure it would have gotten written without having that accountability.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, it's a little bit like the idea I've heard it before when someone buys a car, for example, and then someone else asks them, what do you think of that car? That you've got, do you like the car that you're driving? And most people will say, yeah, no, it's a great car, because they have put something of themselves and their own worth, but by being seen to have integrity. I'm buying this car and I obviously believe in this car. And I see it sometimes with, you're talking about accountability partners, by someone saying out to the world or saying to some other person, this is what I'm doing. I'm an author. I'm going to be an author. Just by the act of saying that to someone else in the world, who's going to then check up on your progress.
That's right.
That's like almost that first step. It starts moving you along the road.
That's right. And actually, research proves your point that if you state to someone else what you plan to achieve, you are much more likely to follow through. So I think that is to your point, it's a very important first step in the process.
Now, the book is all about getting rid of this inner critic. And I know everyone that's listening to this just now will have experienced in some form their inner critic. It might maybe take different forms. Sometimes it's it's just I'm not good enough, or I'm not talented enough, or I'm only going to put this out when it's 100% perfect, in which case it sometimes never comes out at all. First of all, when you're starting to think about the sense of the inner critic, where do we start? Is it almost like, Alcoholics Anonymous, first recognize that you have a problem and then they kind of move through the steps?
So the answer to your question is yes. The first step is really to recognize it, but there might be some clues that you need to pay attention to first before you even realize that you have a problem with this. And one of them is what you just said. If you have trouble getting things done, if you procrastinate and keep going over the same things again in order to get it perfect, that is a sign that you may have perfectionistic tendencies, and, that your inner critic is telling you, well, it's not good enough. So, you can't submit it. You can't show it. You can't take the next step. So sometimes noticing your behavior, another behavior that you might notice, is whether you ask for help or not. So people who have a strong inner critic tend not to ask for help because they're afraid that they will be seen as a fraud or not as good as. So they try to do everything themselves. So that's another sign that perhaps, if you have a fear of letting other people know some vulnerability about you, maybe that's some knowledge that you're lacking, and then you try to cover it up by doing it yourself. That's a sign of having an inner critic. And I would say the last one is also fear of failure. We all fail. In my book, I talk about a very major failure that I had that I thought was just going to end my career forever. But there are people that particularly fear failure because they assume that they will be seen as less than, not as good as. And so that's another sign that you may have an inner critic. So those are some signals and signs that people can look for.
And that last one, that the fear of failure. I mean, I've seen it almost not just with the individual, but almost culturally going on. I come from a part of the world where typically there's been a very strong fear of failure, not being seen to fail. And I remember when I moved to California and lived in California for many years, it was like a breath of fresh air, because failure was seen as a very different type of thing. It was seen as feedback, really, to what you were doing. But and it's only kind of being in a different environment and kind of everyone around you kind of thinking in that way is something that made me realize that maybe the place I'd come from in the world, there was a strong cultural bias towards don't put your head above the parapet. And that's, I would say, it's changing in the UK, and I know in other parts of the world just now as well. But I'm guessing culture, where you're coming from, the family, the people you have around you, has a big part to play in that.
Without a doubt, your family, your culture. I work with a number of people who are Chinese, and failure to them is just a horrifying experience. Because that's how they've been raised. And, some of the things that are being seen in high schools and colleges now, even in the United States, is that anxiety levels are much higher among students than they used to be, because many students are brought up believing that their skills and abilities are inborn and that they can't be changed. And people that have that kind of fixed mindset also believe that they cannot fail, that that's just not an appropriate thing to do. Whereas people who have a growth mindset, as Carol Dwek, the psychologist, calls it, do see failure as a learning experience. So it does have a lot to do with your family, the messages that you received when you were raised, the culture that you live in, even the town that you live in. It can vary from place to place. I happen to work with a lot of scientists because I'm in Boston, and the biopharmaceutical field is very large here. And I have learned a lot about learning from failure from the scientists that I work with, because they have said to me that without failure, there would be no medicines on the market today. Because it's failure that informs them when they need to make a mid-course correction in the route that they're pursuing. And so they expect that, and they accept that as part of their job. But again, it varies from industry to industry as well.
I'm thinking sometimes it's almost then treating, whether it's writing a book or something, almost thinking in your head, this is an experiment. I'm creating this as an experiment. And sometimes with that word experiment, it kind of changes the mind slightly, because you then start to think about, I'm going to be getting feedback on this, I'm going to be tweaking, I'm going to be improving. And the first version is not necessarily, the first draft is not going to be the perfect thing by any stretch of the imagination, but it's going to be a constant case of trying to improve, tweaking, getting feedback, and that feedback loop.
That's right. And actually, when I wrote my book, I did view it as an experiment. And I set it as a goal, as I mentioned earlier. I said, let's see if I can do this. I'm going to set this out as my own personal challenge. And at the time, I had no idea whether people were going to read it. And moreover, whether they were going to resonate with the message. And frankly, I was surprised when they did, and pleasantly surprised. But for me, it really was an experiment. Can I do this?
Yeah, you're talking about those kind of learning experiences. I know that you had one of those kind of learning experiences where something, in your previous work, where something didn't go as you would have maybe have hoped. And you had to, that could have been an incident which could have, completely kind of destroyed you, in terms of emotionally, in terms of the personal angst you would have felt from that. But you used it as a learning experience and actually used it to kind of change how you were working. Can you talk to us about that experience?
So the experience that I had was early on in my career, and I was a sales manager for a technology company. And I was very young and promoted really beyond not necessarily beyond my abilities, but beyond my experience level. And I was responsible for the relationship with a major bank. And there was a customer in the bank who was in a position where they evaluated technology but never bought any. So basically, I ignored her. And lo and behold, one Sunday, there was an article on the front page of the business section of the Boston Globe where this client of mine was quoted basically knocking the ability of the salespeople in my company. Not me personally, but it was very obvious, that it was aimed at my company. This was an absolutely horrible experience because I thought I was going to lose my job. That would be the end of my career and so on. And so what I will say to listeners who've had a major setback, that I did live with shame for a long time over this incident. I didn't grow from it immediately. But as the researcher Brene Brown, who researches shame, says, there's a difference between I did something bad and thinking that I am bad. And for a while after this experience, I thought I was bad. I thought I had nothing to offer. I thought that, all of this was my fault. And with perspective, I came to see it very differently. I came to see that I did not receive the training and the support that I really needed to have to handle a situation like this. And I also came to see that this career was not really what I wanted to be doing. Painful as it was for me at the time to recognize that and accept that. So it was a process, but from every failure can come a real learning. And what I know about organizations and politics and how organizations function, I learned largely from this experience.
I know a lot of people you coach today, they're making that transition in their career, whether that's in terms of internally within a business or from one business to another, or maybe they're coming out and moving into consultancy or starting something completely new as well. I'm guessing, especially if you're relatively senior in an organization, there is a lot of what feels like kind of sunk cost. I've invested my own personal self is wrapped up in that position I currently have, whether it's vice president, manager, whatever the title is as well. How do you, when you're working with clients, how do you go to start working with them on building maybe a larger conception of themselves as not just being their title at that particular company that they're at that point?
Well, it's an excellent question because I will, I sometimes will start by sharing my knowledge of research with them. So to give you an example and to give your listeners an example, research has shown that achieving higher titles or more money or more status does not result in greater happiness. So that is a misconception, for example, a lot of people have. They assume, okay, when I get this next promotion, when I get the $10,000 raise, I'm going to be happier. And the research shows that that is not the case, that people go back to their base level. So you talked about a new car earlier. It's kind of like you get the new car, you drive it out of the showroom, it has that new car smell, it's so wonderful. But in a week, the new car smell is gone and it's just a car. You're used to it. So what I try to help people understand are the factors that really contribute to happiness. And what really contributes to happiness is when you work where your interests and your strengths are in alignment along with your values. You are likely to be more engaged in what you do rather than just working toward a goal, but being miserable as you're working toward it. So, I help people look at what are they really interested in? What is really valuable to them? Is it flexibility in their schedule? Is it working closer to home? Is it having a culture, that supports innovation and creativity? And then what are they really good at that they like to do, that's really energizing to them? And so then I help them put together a picture of those things. And then we look at, is there an alignment between those interests and strengths and values and what they're currently doing? Or how far apart might they be? So that's how I get the process started.
I was looking at a stat the other day saying that I think it's worldwide about 47% of jobs now are at risk from automation over the next 20 years because of artificial intelligence and robotics and machine learning and things like that. And so that's, I think in America alone, I think I saw a figure something the other day saying about nearly 60 million jobs are at risk from this new age of AI and this age of disruption we're about to go through. So that's going to be a lot of people who have spent many years becoming very, very skilled at what they do, and suddenly a machine is coming along that can do it faster, cheaper, potentially better than they can. And they're going to have to reskill and rethink, what is it that I actually want to do with my work, my rest of my life? Were those people, clients that you work with, who maybe they've just lost a sense of what is it that I'm actually good at, because they've been caught up in the title of their job and the kind of work that they're doing? How do you start to help them rediscover what those talents are when they maybe feel they're like, listen, I've given everything to the work that I've been doing. I don't feel like I've got any talents.
What I help them do is rediscover themselves. So one of the issues when we're working full time is that we don't have time to explore options. And so what I say to people, anybody that wants to work with me, is that they have to devote a certain amount of time. It's not, it's not a tremendous burden, but they have to set aside a few hours a week to do some internal work. Some of that involves writing. Some of that involves taking assessments, to really take a step back and look at the work that they've done over their career and think back over those things that they're particularly proud of, that if they could recreate again, they would want to do. Sometimes I have them write in the future. So if they imagine their life in the future, let's say a year from now or 2 years from now, what would they want to be doing? And the process of writing these things down is not just busy work. It actually helps the brain organize its thinking and, really helps get inside someone's psyche to get at what they have probably lost because they've been on autopilot doing what they do every day. So that's how I help people get started.
So let's just change pace a little bit here as well. I'm interested. I mean, you said you're in Boston. Some incredible technology companies there doing amazing things. But I'm wondering, for you as a writer and as a coach, do you have an online resource or a tool or app that helps you do your work better, it helps you kind of enjoy the work that you're doing, whether that's as a writer or as a coach? So
this may be a slightly different answer to your question. But I will tell you that the tool that I find most helpful for me are podcasts. So I'm not just saying that because you're interviewing me, but I do find when I'm driving or when I'm walking, I really like to listen to people. To me, it's like a one-on-one conversation. And so I really curate for myself those podcasts that I find most helpful to my own creativity and thinking. And I will tell you that because I have found scientific research so helpful to my own career and my clients, that I tend to listen to people and read the writing of people that have done scientific research in the social sciences around happiness and thriving and well-being. And so those are some of the things that I really gravitate to help myself and my own creativity.
And if someone's interested in this area, especially when you're talking about the kind of social sciences, is there a particular podcast you think they should check out, they should listen to?
Yes, there is. So there is a podcast by Adam Grant. He is a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania. I highly recommend his podcast. I'm blanking on the name at the moment. The other podcast is from the Greater Good Science Center in Berkeley, California. They have a podcast, The Science of Happiness. And again, it's based on research. So that's one of the things that I really like about it. It's called, yes, that one is called The Science of Happiness. And Adam Grant's is called Work Life.
Work Life.
Mm-hmm.
And we're gonna put these links for everyone. So if you're listening to this podcast just now when you're out and about, or you're in the car traveling, you're at the gym, then don't worry. We're gonna have people go to jamestaylor.me and just type in Susan Peppercorn. You're gonna find all the links to this as well. What about if you were to recommend one book and one record, one album to our listeners? What would they be?
So the book that I would recommend, because I know that some of your listeners have either started their own business or are thinking about it, is the book called Entrepreneurial You by Dorie Clark. Dorie has written a number of books. This is her most recent, but it's designed to help people who are thinking about starting their own businesses know how to go about the process. She has interviewed for the book entrepreneurs in a variety of fields where they talk about their successes as well as their mistakes. And she's collected this in this book, and it's really terrific.
Wonderful. And what would that album be for you? I mean, you have some incredible music where you're part of the world.
Yes.
You have some incredible bands and artists that have come. You've got incredible Berklee School of Music, one of the best music schools in the world, is based in Boston as well.
True. So I'll tell you two artists who I really love. That would be John Legend and Blake Shelton, who is a country artist. So they are two of my favorites. I can't remember their albums right now, but I could get you those names. I have a diverse and very wide interest in music. So John Legend is more of a blues and pop singer, very popular in the United States. And Blake Shelton is also very popular. He's on a show here called The Voice on TV, and he's a very well-known country singer. So those are two of my favorites.
Wonderful. We'll have those links as well. So a final question for you, Susan. Let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and you had to start from scratch. So you've got all the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you. You know no one. You have to restart. What would you do? How would you restart?
I would write a proposal to do a TED Talk, to do a TEDx talk. I think if you want to restart and you want to get people to know you, and this is something that's been on my mind for some time, the TED stage is such a great way. It's such a great platform. And I think that being able to get on a TED stage is also a terrific challenge. It's not easy to do. So it's probably what I would start with, because I also like to speak in front of groups. And so it would put a lot of things together, for me personally, if that's something that I could pursue.
Well, there you go. And I think where you are in the world, you have the oldest TEDx in the world. It happens in Cambridge, Massachusetts, every year, TEDx Cambridge. And a good friend of mine, Tamsin Webster, who was the executive producer of that, and it actually trains speakers on how to do TED Talks, because it's a real art being able to do a great TED Talk. So I'm looking forward to seeing you on stage at a TED Talk at some point soon as well. So finally, what is the best way if people want to kind of learn more about your work, through the Inner Critic work, and I know the other side in terms of the Positive Workplace Partners, where should they go? Where can they learn more about you?
So they can learn more about me on my website that you just mentioned, Positive Workplace Partners. I also have some free ebooks on that site that people are welcome to download. One is about how to make a successful career transition, and another one is a free ebook on helping people determine if they're in the right job. It's a self-assessment tool. So they can find me there. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I'm also on Twitter. So I would love to hear from your listeners in any way that they would like to connect with me.
Well, Susan, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best with the book. And I hope to see you on a TED stage very, very soon. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, James. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.